Hey there, and welcome back to Utility Sports. We have some breaking news. Derrick Rose is being traded to the New York Knicks, and Rose ultimately is going back to a place where he had played in his career. How do you feel about this trade as a whole for the New York Knicks and also for the Detroit Pistons?
Yeah, so we had kind of seen this coming to a head with Derrick Rose and the Detroit Pistons. A lot of talks last trade deadline regarding Derrick Rose possibly to the Lakers. I know the Clippers had been interested, a few other contenders as well. Nothing ultimately got done. Now we see Rose and the Pistons here are agreeing that a trade was best for both sides. I think that was really obvious. The Pistons have not been playing well this year, looking like they're going to go for a younger, youthful approach to this roster. And Derrick Rose is the first guy out in that scenario. Derrick Rose goes to the New York Knicks, and the only reason a reunite makes sense there is Tom Thibodeau. This will be the third time Derrick Rose has played for Tom Thibodeau now in his career. Obviously, once with Chicago, one time with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and now with the New York Knicks, his second stint in New York. And I'm a little bit perplexed about this for the New York Knicks. I know they're not giving up a lot here. It's Dennis Smith Jr. and draft comp. I'm guessing that's going to be probably a second round pick, whether it's this year or a future year. That's yet to be seen. I would be extremely surprised if Derrick Rose got a first round pick this year in a trade. But we see him going to the New York Knicks, and I just don't really understand it. They're sixth in the Eastern Conference. They're a half game ahead of being 11th in the Eastern Conference. And I just don't think Derrick Rose is really a guy that moves the needle that much for a team like this, especially when the New York Knicks have hit on a guy like Emmanuel quickly in the back end of the first round. I didn't necessarily think he would have been as impactful this quick into his career, but he has been. He's averaging over 12 points a game as a rookie. He's going to be an all-rookie team consideration at least. And now you kind of bring in a guy who's going to logjam that position. Obviously, the Dennis Smith Jr. thing didn't work out. This goes to show how bad previous management was in that deal for Kristaps Porzingis. Dennis Smith Jr. was the centerpiece player in that trade for Kristaps Porzingis. He's now out. Another part of making that move was for the salary cap space. They didn't land a superstar free agent. I know some of you guys might like Julius Randle. I'm sorry, he's not a superstar free agent acquisition. He just isn't. And now we see them moving on from Dennis Smith Jr. in this deal. I think Dennis Smith Jr. is a guy who I think he's poised for success moving forward. I think he showed a lot of maturity asking to go play in the bubble, the G League bubble. And I think that it bodes well for his career. I think the Pistons are going to be a place that give him an opportunity. Killian Hayes is obviously out for a long time with his injury. DeLon Wright, I just don't believe in him as a real starting guard in this league. I think that Dennis Smith Jr. has a chance to go there, actually get some run, give himself an opportunity. People forget that his rookie year, he averaged about 16 points a game for my Mavericks, showed a lot of potential, showed a lot of talent. And I think Detroit is a good spot for him to get that opportunity. I don't necessarily think it leads to a lot of success for Detroit or for Dennis Smith Jr., but I think this is a positive move for his career alone.
So let me prompt you with this here. What went wrong between Dennis Smith Jr. and the Knicks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Part of it is they just never really got on the same page about what his role is going to be there. They tried forcing Frank Ntilikina. They brought in Elfrid Payton. They just logjammed the position a lot. And this is something the Knicks had a bad history of doing, of getting a bunch of players that they wanted to kind of develop. We saw the same thing with Kevin Knox. A lot of his minutes got deteriorated as well. Coaching never got on the same page with Dennis Smith Jr. And to be honest, he's a guy who he does have his struggles. He's not a good shooter. Defensively, he has some upside there. And when he's locked in, I think he can be a quality defender, but that's not consistent. The motor's inconsistent. I think that coaching tends to not really play in the favor of Dennis Smith Jr. in a lot of ways. The fact that he's going to Detroit, a team that is clearly rebuilding, and they're going to focus on playing younger players, gives him a chance here. The Knicks, they go so up and down with what they want to do. In my opinion, I have been very proud of how the New York Knicks have been acting in recent history, especially since their new management got there. The way that they went about drafting Obi Toppin, even grabbing Emmanuel quickly, not spending a ton of money in free agency and playing it a little bit slower, looking for a long-term rebuild, not pulling a trigger on a Chris Paul trade. But now we see them kind of accelerating their process for a guy who, quite frankly, I just don't think has a lot of power in the Eastern Conference to really change where they're at this point. I'm a little confused by it. I'm interested to see what the draft pick compensation is, though, in this trade.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and refresh the page and kind of see if anything has actually come out yet in terms of the draft pick comp. I don't think it has just yet, but we will take a look to ensure that we have our bases covered. I don't think that it will be out yet. No, it is not currently out. So we are speculating that it very well could be a couple of second round picks in the future, whether it be, this year or the following years. But I think ultimately this move doesn't make a ton of sense for the Knicks in their direction that they were heading. I don't know if you want to be in the camp of, really trading away draft pick comp where you currently sit. I don't think you're just not that close to really being a true contender in the East. You need a lot more than that. I would have been more comfortable keeping whatever draft pick comp you had and packaging it possibly for a young player. Guys like Brandon Ingram that you could see possibly on the trade block. Obviously, the Pelicans had re-signed him, but I mean, you never know if he does become available. That's a guy that you want to throw all of your chips on the table for, and a guy that could really lead your franchise potentially. I don't know for the Knicks what they were really trying to accomplish with this deal. I don't think that this moves the needle at all, like you had stated. I just don't see this as being a move in the right direction ultimately. I mean, for me, I could see it panning out where he ultimately gets an even bigger role in New York and you can maybe flip him later. I think that's possible. But for me personally, I don't think that they're going to really have that much more improvement, obviously, with him playing a bigger role. And I don't think you're going to get that much more comp than ultimately what Detroit just got now.
Yeah, and that's the one thing too. Looking at Tom Thibodeau, he has a bad history of doing this. You know how critical I had been of him in the past when he came to Minnesota first to be their head coach, and I had been very negative about what he's going to do with the roster. We had seen him bring in Taj Gibson, even Luol Deng for no reason, not near the back end of his career. Derrick Rose. It just has a history of bringing in the guys he's coached previously, and I just don't really think that makes a lot of sense when you're looking at the Knicks' current outlook. A guy that they could have used in a trade would possibly be Lonzo Ball. He's a younger player. He fits that defensive identity that Tom Thibodeau wants to develop there in New York. He fits better with the timeline, and you probably wouldn't have had to give up a lot more than what you just gave up for Derrick Rose, honestly. I think that it's a little perplexing to me making a move for Derrick Rose, the guy who's on an expiring contract, is going to have interest this offseason from a variety of contenders once he hits free agency. And I'd be very surprised if he chooses the New York Knicks over a team like the Los Angeles Lakers, Los Angeles Clippers, Milwaukee Bucks, Brooklyn Nets on a mid-level exception type of deal. I'd be so surprised if he decides to go that route and decides to stay in New York. I just don't really think it makes sense long-term. I don't think that really improves them that much in the short term. Sure, they're slightly better today than they were yesterday, but not enough that it's going to really impact the end of the season for them. At best, they're going to be a 7 or 8 seed in the East, and it's only because teams like Orlando right now are injured. 2 of their top 5 players are out. Toronto's been playing terribly. That's one of those teams that is for sure going to jump them. There's so many teams that have been underperforming out East that are going to start picking it up, and I just don't see the Knicks really taking advantage of this situation. And remember, Julius Randle's been playing career basketball right now, and they're still barely holding a half-game lead over being the 11th seed in the East, with their best player playing the best he's ever played. They've had some pretty good minutes from guys like Austin Rivers this year as well. Mitchell Robinson's developed into a really nice rim protector on the defensive end. And still, at the end of the day, I just don't think that they have enough in the East to even be considered a for sure playoff team. And now they make a move to try and be better in the short term. I just don't really understand it a lot if I'm the New York Knicks.
Yeah, I think Lonzo Ball would have been an interesting guy to bring in. Obviously could get a big role in that offense as a whole. But I agree. I think that would have definitely been the better move rather than trading for Derrick Rose. I think they would have had to pay a little more than what they paid for Rose, but I think that would have definitely been worth it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the video. Let us know in the comments section below if you believe this was a good trade for the Knicks. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. So also don't forget to like up the video and subscribe. We can't wait to see you guys in the next video.